very loud. Okay, so we can start. So we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Okay, so we'll do 3 bows, even mental bows. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do one time the verse of homage or salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Fully Enlightened One. Okay, so good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning, Bhante.
Okay, so good morning. Let me remove. I have to get sort of reaccustomed to giving talks and recording. It's been like 4 months of just wandering around from country to country without doing anything really serious. Okay. Okay, so I think I share the screen. Where is that share? Okay, there it is. Okay, so can you see the text now?
Yes, Bhante.
Yes.
And how is the size?
Can be good.
I could increase the.
That would be great.
Okay. Okay, so we are beginning today a new section of the Anguttara Nikaya. I think we began the Anguttara Nikaya 2017. So it's about 8 years, 7, 8 years that we've been working through it. And so now we come to the Book of Sevens. And I'm going to go through the Book of Sevens, the remaining books, a bit quickly. And today, what I'm taking are 2 suttas, which, interesting that they're joined together here, because both of them, they deal with, we might call the 2 main desires or 2 aspirations of worldly people. What are the things that people in the world want most? Well, actually, there's 3 things, but it doesn't deal with the third. So I would say the 3 things people want are pleasure, usually sensual pleasure, though that's not mentioned here. The second thing is power, and the third thing is wealth. Is that correct? Sensual pleasures, power, and wealth. And so the 2 suttas, or 2 pairs of suttas, deal with, we call from the Buddha's perspective, what is true power and what is true wealth, real wealth. And so the first of these is concerned with powers. And okay, and so we have, as I said, each topic is treated in 2 ways. One is briefly, and the other is with explanation, elaboration. So here we have the powers in brief, which just enumerates 7 powers: the power of faith, power of energy, moral shame, moral dread, power of mindfulness, power of concentration or samadhi, and power of wisdom. And then there is a verse attached to the sutta. And then the next sutta deals with the same theme, but elaborates it or explains each one. And it strikes me as a bit curious how we get these concise suttas, the suttas that just enumerate a list of items. Since you would think, say, if the Buddha is coming out to give a discourse, people have gathered around, whether it's just the monastic community or he's giving the evening discourse where there will be the monastics and lay people have come all the ways from Savatthi or Rajagaha to hear the discourse. Usually you expect him to give a discourse of at least 45 minutes or an hour. But if he just gets out there and says there are these 7 powers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then says, that's it, folks, and goes back into the Ganta Kuti, the perfumed cottage, people would be very disappointed, even angry. So I suppose my assumption is that he would have given more elaborate discourses on these themes, but the monks, for the purpose of easy memorization, would have compressed the discourse into these brief suttas. So if they have to give a discourse on those topics, it's just like today, if we have to give a lecture, sometimes we write a few notes, put them on note cards. But nowadays, people use their cell phone to put the notes on the cell phone. And then based on the notes, then they can give a discourse. So probably the monks just summarize the Buddha's discourse, compressing the discourse to a list. And yeah, and then they would have that list available when they have to give the discourse. And so we're just going to look at the more detailed exposition of these topics. Okay, so here we have the sutta called Powers, again, Powers in Detail. So this will give the definitions or elaborations of these 5 powers. And so we start off with the power of faith. And this is Saddha in Pali, it's Saddha Bala. And what I find is before we come to each of the definitions, what I find interesting is that these 7 powers, and we'll see in the next sutta, these 7 kinds of wealth, are each elaborated by way of what is called the noble disciple, the Arya Savaka, not by way of the Bhikkhu. Often when the Buddha is explaining these topics, he'll say, for example, here a bhikkhu is endowed with faith, or the bhikkhu possesses energy. But here, the subject of the discourse is the noble disciple. In Pali, that would be Arya Savaka. You don't see how to type with this. Okay, I'll have to convert this later into the Foxit version of the PDF. Okay, so the term here is Arya Savaka, and sometimes there's a common interpretation amongst Buddhists that Arya Savaka means a disciple who is a noble one, somebody who is at least the level of Sotapanna. I don't think that is the correct understanding. I think the expression Arya Savaka is used for a disciple who is following the noble path, the path taught by the noble ones being the Buddha and the great arahats. And so we have a contrast often in the text between the noble disciple or noble disciples and the putujana, the worldling or ordinary person. Let me see if I could use, Okay, I'm not going to be able to type today. Okay, so the Putujana is the ordinary person, the person of the world. And there's a common understanding amongst Buddhists that Putujana means anybody who is not one of the noble ones. In other words, somebody who is not yet a stream enterer or on the path of stream entry is a Putujana. But the way I've been understanding now the suttas, when we go back to the sutta level of teaching, I find that the expression Putujana is almost always conjoined with asutava, the unlearned or unwise ordinary person, and contrasted with the Arya Savaka. So my understanding now is that the suttas are using the word Putujana to refer to like ordinary people of the world who have no real interest in the Dhamma, no engagement with the Dhamma. There might be people who profess to be Buddhists, but engage, say, in devotional activities, but they're not making an effort to understand the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, to train in the Dhamma. And they're contrasted with the Arya Savaka, who is not necessarily a noble one, not necessarily a stream enterer or one on the path to stream entry, but one who is, I would say, deeply dedicated to following the noble path. The commentaries will make a distinction amongst the Putujanas between what they call the Undaputujana, the blind ordinary person, the blind worldling, and the Kalyana Putujana, the good or excellent ordinary person. And the Kalyana Putujana is a person who is not yet a stream enterer or on the path to stream entry, but who is deeply committed to the practice of the training and is sort of working diligently at the cultivation of sila, samadhi, and panya, aiming at realization or attainment of the noble path. Okay, so here we have the sutta expounded by way of a noble disciple, and we could understand this as a noble disciple in that broad sense of one who possesses these excellent qualities and is deeply engaged in the practice and the training. And so the disciple is endowed with faith. And what is the meaning of faith here? Saddha. This is what the elaboration says. He places faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata. The Tathagata is the Buddha. So having faith is not just devotion, personal devotion towards the Buddha, but it's a trust in the Buddha as one who has reached the enlightenment. And one understands the Buddha as one who possesses certain qualities. These qualities are summarized in this standard formula for the Buddha. And we could group these qualities into certain, maybe narrower categories. So the way I would see it is first that the Buddha is arahant, which means that he's one who is completely purified through the destruction of all the defilements and thereby liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So this emphasizes the purity, the inner purity of the Buddha's mind. Then we have perfectly enlightened, which emphasizes the knowledge capacity of the Buddha, that the Buddha has that all-embracing, all-encompassing wisdom that is pierced through to the ultimate truth of things and comprehends the many dimensions of the reality. then when we say accomplished in true conduct and true knowledge and conduct, so we have here again, knowledge is on the side of knowledge. Conduct introduces a new dimension, the behavior or conduct of the Buddha. Then fortunate, we could say, could swing either way. Knower of the world again aligns with the aspect of knowledge. And similarly, enlightened one aligns with the aspect of knowledge. But then we have two other qualities mentioned that indicate the Buddha's role as teacher. First, he is the unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed, and then teacher of devas and human beings. So both of these designations signify the Buddha as the teacher who's qualified to teach because he is perfectly enlightened, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, and the knower of the world. And then the Blessed One, I think, indicates Bhagava, again, that the Buddha possesses numerous wondrous and excellent qualities. Okay, but of all of these qualities that are mentioned, the one that is sort of singled out as the defining characteristic of faith is faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata. And that means being willing to accept the teachings of the Buddha, his doctrinal teachings, the path he lays down as flowing out from, I would call this flowing out from a definitive understanding of the true nature of things, especially of the various laws and principles operative in the universe. Okay, so it starts off with faith, and the faith in the Tathagata is mentioned, but fuller expositions of faith mention faith in the Dhamma and in the Noble Sangha. But here we're highlighting faith. Oh, so, and then we move from faith to the next power is the power of energy. And I think it's significant that the power of energy follows right from the power of faith, because once one has faith in the enlightenment of the Buddha, and one sees that the Buddha is teaching, what he's teaching is dukkha and liberation from dukkha, suffering and the ultimate freedom from suffering. And to move from suffering to freedom from suffering, the Buddha lays down a path of training, a path of practice. And so one has to undertake the practice of that path. And to undertake the practice of that path, one requires virya, energy or vigor or diligence. And the practice of energy is explained as involving maybe two complementary sides, two complementary aspects. One is the removing, the abandoning of unwholesome qualities. These will be unwholesome qualities of the mind. Particularly, we have, of course, in the suttas, we have different groups of unwholesome qualities. The most basic, greed, hatred, delusion. Otherwise, we have the 5 hindrances, particularly in the meditative training. I would say that would be the abandoning of the 5 hindrances, would be sensual lust, ill will or resentment, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and regret, and doubt. So overcoming those barriers, those internal obstacles to the cultivation of the path, and then acquiring and developing the wholesome qualities. And particularly in the meditative training, these would especially include the cultivate, well, maybe the foundation of this will be the cultivation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, cultivating mindfulness of the body, feelings, mind states, and dhammas. And cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness is, again, it's a complex process which involves not only mindfulness as an isolated quality, but we'll see, I think, yeah, we have the power of mindfulness down below, so I won't say more about mindfulness. Such as here we say acquiring wholesome qualities would entail especially cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which then lead on to samadhi or concentration, and then lead to panya or wisdom. And so those are the 2 sides in the cultivation of energy. And then the remaining phrases are just elaborations of what is entailed by cultivating energy. So here I have the translation. One is tamava, I think it is, which is translated strong. But interestingly, the Pali word is tama. And in Sanskrit, I think it would be stama, which is related sort of through some distant linguistic connection to the English word stamina. When one has stamina, one has strength, right? So that Sanskrit word is stama. And then since in Pali, the st sound also often turns into t, we get tama. So one is strong, firm in exertion, not casting off the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities, not backsliding, not yielding to laziness. So that is the power of energy. And then in the standard list, the familiar list of the 5 powers, we go from energy to mindfulness. But in this sutta, in this particular constellation of factors, we have 2 additional powers added. And these are 2 complementary powers that always go together. One is the power of moral shame. The Pali word is hiri, and the complement is the power, translated the power of moral dread. In Pali, this is ottappa. And so in the definition, what is moral shame? Here, the noble disciple has the sense of moral shame. One is ashamed of bodily, verbal, and moral misconduct. He is ashamed of acquiring unwholesome qualities of mind. And something has to be said maybe about the word shame, because now in contemporary discourse, the word shame has been getting, you say, bad press. Maybe rightly so, because the word is used nowadays somewhat in the sense of abusing others, ridiculing others, disparaging others. And so in the schoolyard, say if there's a student who's a bit fat, other students will come, look at that fat student, oh, bad figure, and so on. Or if there's a foreign student, immigrant who's come to the school, arrived at the school, the other students will ridicule the immigrant students and shame them, maybe because they come from they don't speak English perfectly, even though for 4 or 5 years, as they study diligently, probably they'll be much more literate than the students who are ridiculing them. But this is, to say, the way the idea of shame is being interpreted today. But in the Buddhist text, what is meant here by the word hiri is that inner voice, maybe of conscience, or let us say it's the inner sense of self-respect that restrains one from engaging in unwholesome actions or from sliding inwardly into these bad unwholesome qualities. So it's that inner voice that tells you that if you engage in those types of misconduct, and if you let yourself give way to and yield to these bad, unwholesome mental qualities, you'll be tarnishing your character. You'll be soiling your character or staining your character. And so it's that urge or impulse to preserve the inner dignity of one's character that is meant by hiri, that inner voice, maybe of conscience, that restrains one from unwholesome types of conduct and mental states out of a sense of inner self-respect. And the complement to that, the sort of partner, is moral dread, which in Pali, it's ottappa. I just don't see the typewriter. So ottappa is based on the root, verbal root tup, which means to burn. And so ottappa is the fear of the consequences of misconduct. You could say the fear of getting burned through engaging in wholesome actions. And so there are different types of negative consequences, undesirable consequences that come through misconduct. One is that, especially when you're associating with good people, virtuous people, if you engage in misconduct, then you get rejected by them. You'll get ostracized, criticized by those that you consider to be wise and virtuous. And if the misconduct is serious enough, you can be subject to legal penalties. You can be caught by legal authorities and fined or imprisoned, or even worse. And then, especially from the Buddhist perspective, you escape criticism from your peers. Everybody's still, you're engaging in misconduct, cheating, stealing, committing adultery, whatever, but nobody knows about it. Everybody thinks you're a good, worthy person. The authorities find out nothing, so you are still respected member of the community. Maybe you get awards, certificates, honor, praise from everybody. But there's still the karma that you don't escape. And so having the power of moral dread is rooted in a recognition of the law of karma, that unwholesome deeds that, especially those serious unwholesome deeds that violate the basic principles of ethics, generate that unwholesome karma that even nobody knows about it, but that inner voice of the mind knows about it. And the seeds get deposited there, and in time they will bring their results. And so when you have the power of moral dread out of respect for the law of karma, in recognition of the law of karma, you refrain from unwholesome deeds, from wrongdoing, because you want to avoid the painful consequences through the ripening of that karma. So that is the power of moral dread. And these two powers work together, moral shame and moral dread, as a kind of safeguards, protectors of sila, of one's moral practice. Some people maybe rely more on that inner sense of self-respect to uphold the precepts and the standards of good conduct. Others rely more on that fear of the consequences, but usually the two go together as sort of partners in protecting one's moral integrity, one's ethical integrity. So that is these two additional powers. Then we come to the standard list, and this is a little puzzling to me. So we have the definition here. What is the power of mindfulness? Okay, and then the sutta goes on, or the definition goes on. Here, a noble disciple is mindful, possessing, I think it's paramasati nepaka, supreme mindfulness and alertness, and one who remembers and recollects what was done and said long ago. This is the power of mindfulness. So what is the relation between mindfulness as we usually understand it and remembering and recollecting what was done and said long ago? I really needed a blank word document. Okay, I can't find it. Okay, so the word that we translate as mindfulness is sati, based on the verb sarati. And the original meaning of the verb sarati was to remember. And the original meaning of Pali sati or Sanskrit smriti is memory or recollection. But the Buddha took that word sati and gave it a different meaning in the framework of his own teaching, so that sati is not, usually it's not remembering the past, but it's remembering the present. And you remember the present by keeping the present in mind. So in other words, sati is the ability to keep the present object in mind, or to keep the mind on the present object without letting the mind drift away, without letting the object float away. And so we practice mindfulness of breathing. So what does mindfulness of breathing mean? It means that one bears the breath in mind. One is keeping the breath in mind. One is mindful of feeling. It means one is keeping the feelings in mind. One is attending to the feelings as they arise, as they pass away. And if one loses track of the breath, then as soon as possible, one remembers, I should be attending to the breath. And then one brings the breath back into the mind. So that is the connection between mindfulness and remembering. So the Buddha uses mindfulness, he usually uses mindfulness to mean remembering to keep the object in mind, remember or bearing the object in mind without letting the mind drift away from the object. But occasionally, as here, he goes back to the original sense of the verb sarati, to remember. And so here he says, the noble disciple is mindful, one who remembers and recollects what was done and said long ago. But we also have one who possesses supreme mindfulness and alertness. And so the way I would understand the connection is that when one is mindful in one's everyday life of what one is doing and what one is saying, then it becomes easier to recollect that, to remember that at a later time. So if we just go about our everyday activities with a scattered mind, without closely observing what we're doing, then easy to forget what we've done or what we've said. Did you say something? Ah, I didn't say that. Oh, but we all heard it. You've forgotten what you said because you weren't mindful. But when you're mindful, it sort of leaves a cut mark on the mind. It's like if you're taking a walk through the woods and you're not sure about the direction, as you go through, when you reach certain points actually the park authorities do this, they put markers along the path. Sometimes it will be like a strip of blue tape to indicate one path, another pathway, maybe a strip of red tape. And so as you go along, walking through the woods, you know where you are because you're following those strips of blue tape. Those are sort of reminders of the path. And then when you get to the end of the path, when you want to find your way back to the starting point, you follow again those strips of blue or red tape. And so when you maintain mindfulness in the midst of your activity, it's like putting strips of blue tape on the mind. So then at a later point in time, you can find your way back mentally to your actions and words from an earlier time. So that is the power of mindfulness here. But as I said, it's a rather puzzling definition because most times, in most places where the Buddha is explaining what is mindfulness, he'll say, here the disciple dwells contemplating the body and the body, feelings and feelings, states of mind and states of mind, and dhammas and dhammas. Okay, then we move to the next power. We have the power of concentration. This is the power of samadhi, which is defined here by way of the standard formula for the 4 jhanas. I'm not going to go into an elaborate explanation here, but I would just say so often this debate comes up. Are the jhanas absolutely necessary to fulfill the requirement of concentration? In my own opinion, through the practice of mindfulness meditation, in the mode of insight, cultivating insight, one can also develop a sufficiently powerful samadhi for insight to arise. Okay, then we come to the 7th power, and this is sort of the crown or culmination of the 7, and that is the power of wisdom. And here it's defined, the noble disciple is wise, possesses the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away. I think in the translation, I added the word discerns. In Pali, it reads simply, it's the wisdom of arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. So what is this wisdom of arising and passing away? So this is the wisdom of insight. It's the vipassana jnana, which discerns, examines the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the constituents of our experience: bodily form, feeling, perceptions, including ideas, ideation, the volitional formations, all the volitional activities of the mind, and consciousness, and sees that each of these aggregates arises, stands just for a brief moment, and then vanishes, disappears. And so this kind of insight wisdom, generally it requires a sufficient or strong degree of samadhi. So one collects the mind, composes it, brings it to a kind of state of unity, and then uses that unified mind to examine, in turn, each of the aggregates, generally beginning with the aggregate of material form, the bodily form, seeing all of the bodily processes at subtler and subtler levels arising and then breaking up just like bubbles on the water. And then one turns to feelings, seeing how the feelings are arising and bursting one after another. Then ideas or perceptions arising and bursting, and then all of the volitional activities, again, arising and breaking up. And then one turns to the subtlest of the aggregates, which is that of consciousness, and one sees how each act, how the mind actually consists of individual acts of consciousness, which arise, cognize their object, and then they're gone. And so that is the wisdom of arising and passing away, which brings one to the understanding of which characteristic of existence. Right, exactly. So this is the insight into anicca, or impermanence. And then as one develops that insight into impermanence, it reveals that everything within the five aggregates being changing, impermanent, dissolving and breaking up, there's no safety or security or permanent bliss within the five aggregates. And since the five aggregates are breaking up and vanishing all the time, they cannot be taken as being I and mine, being myself. So through the insight into arising and passing away, one moves into the insight into impermanence, dukkha, and non-self. And that's the insight into impermanence that eventually penetrates into the Four Noble Truths and brings the complete destruction of suffering. Okay, then we'll just take a quick look at the verses. Okay, so here we have the power of faith, energy, moral shame and dread, mindfulness and samadhi and wisdom. Here it uses the word bhikkhu. It says, a powerful bhikkhu possessing these is wise and lives happily. Then he should carefully examine the Dhamma, or maybe carefully examine Dhamma's phenomena, and deeply see the meaning with wisdom. And then it speaks about the emancipation of the mind as being like the extinguishing of a lamp. When the lamp is extinguished, the light goes out. And so when the mind is emancipated, all of the defilements, including the subtlest one, like ignorance, is extinguished. Okay, so these are the 7 powers. Maybe I should just do quickly the 7 kinds of wealth without elaboration, and then we could just see the difference between them. Yeah, so I don't have to elaborate on them, but we have the 7 kinds of wealth. And we have the wealth of faith. We already have the definition of that. And we have the wealth of moral shame and moral dread. We've already explained that. The wealth of sila. This is explained or defined in terms of observing the 5 precepts. That becomes a kind of wealth. And then the wealth of, yeah, it seems to me the order should be changed. I would put the wealth of generosity next. And here we have the noble disciple dwells at home. So you see that the 7 kinds of wealth are expressly defined by way of the lay disciple. Because here's the disciple who dwells at home, and also the disciple who is observing the 5 precepts, not the patimokkha or code of monastic discipline. So one dwells at home with a heart free from the stain of miserliness. One is generous, open-handed, delighting in giving and sharing. That's the wealth of generosity. Then we have the wealth of learning. And so you see that the Buddha expects the noble disciple, even the lay disciple as well, to learn the Dhamma. And one learns the Dhamma by listening and remembering what one has heard. So those dhammas that are good, or those teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, those teachings he has learned much of, retains in mind, recites verbally, good practice to recite the suttas, to investigate the meaning, and to penetrate with insight by view. So one gains the wealth of learning, and then from learning, one goes on to wisdom, which is explained in the same way as the wisdom of insight, the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away. And so we have these 7 kinds of wealth, including the wisdom of insight that leads to the complete end of suffering, taught for the noble disciple who is a lay disciple, one dwelling at home. Okay, now maybe we could take some questions. And the way we take the questions is by using the hand symbol. You click on the hand symbol, and then I will see a little hand, and then I'll call on those. And so we can begin with V, and then you unmute.
Yes. Can you hear me, Bhante?
Very clearly, yeah.
Yeah. Normally I heard the Dhamma that we need to learn is good at the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. What it is at the beginning that we need to learn, and what is in the middle and at the end? What exactly does Buddha trying to aim at?
Yeah, the suttas themselves don't give like formal definitions. What is meant by good in the good? What is meant by the beginning? What is the middle? What is the end? The Visuddhimagga has different ways of interpreting those phrases, which seem convincing to me. So we could do it in different ways. So we could say good in the beginning would be maybe saddha, faith, and sila, or maybe saddha, faith, sila, virtuous conduct, and chaga, generosity, or dana, giving. Good in the middle would be the development of samadhi or citta bhavana, the training of the mind. And good in the end could be the development of panya, development of wisdom or insight. So that's one way to take it. Another way I think the Visuddhimagga offers, you could take good in the beginning to be saddha, sila, and saddha, generosity, and sila. Good in the middle to be the development of samadhi and panya, concentration and wisdom. Good in the end to be the attainment of the mukti, liberation. Yeah, so there's no fixed way to take those expressions, but yeah, probably the way that I would go would be for the beginning, sila, good in the middle, training and all of the practices that lead to and culminate in samadhi, and good in the end, the teachings of panya that culminate in liberation.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Bhante. No further question. Yeah.
Okay. So next is Doran.
Thank you, Bhante. It's great to be back in these classes. Just a small point that I didn't see much of a conflict with the Buddha's usage of mindfulness sati as one remembers what was done long ago because of the following interpretation. And I think it makes sense, especially coming after Hiri and Udapa. And I think he might be referring to negative incidents that happened, unwholesome incidents that might have happened in the past. Trying to think of an example. Let's say you get triggered in conversations with a parent and you raised your voice once long ago. Then I think maybe what he's referring to is be mindful now in the present moment of what was done long ago so that you don't do it again.
Yeah, that's a possible way to understand that connection. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so next I see Amy. Amy, you just have to unmute.
Thank you, Bhante. I have a quick question. I recently heard a Dhamma talk. I think it was from Insight Meditation Center, talking about the anicca, the realization of anicca. And the talk says that commonly it's thought of the anicca of forms, but it's in fact it's anicca of our own perceptions, sanya. And so with our perception, things come in and out of our perceptions, you know, maybe the table, the chair, the whatever. Does that seem right to accurate to you, or does the anicca applies to everything, sanya and rupa and all the other five aggregates?
Yeah, it applies to everything. I didn't quite understand the point. The persons who gave the talk said that anicca applies just to perception.
Yeah, not so much the forms.
No, it applies at all the five aggregates are impermanent.
Okay, that makes good sense. Thank you.
We also often find in the text that one examines, especially if you look in the Samyutta Nikaya chapter 22, which is the chapter on the five aggregates, you'll see there's a whole bunch of suttas which will go that one contemplates the material form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent.
Okay.
It goes through all five of them.
Okay, so chapter 22, Samyutta Nikaya.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Samyutta Nikaya chapter 22.
Okay, thank you so much.
It's a volume, and chapter 22 is on the five aggregates. And then also chapter 35 in the Samyutta Nikaya will have the same kind of template, but now in regard to the six sense objects and the six sense faculties: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind.
Okay. Samyutta Nikaya chapter 22. Thank you so much.
And 35.
And 35. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, next. And once you finish with the question, then please lower the hand. So, okay, so next is use.
Hi, Bhante. Thank you. Good to see you back. My question is, in the wealth of wisdom, the Buddha only mentioned the anicca, the wisdom of anicca. What about the other two characteristics?
I think they follow from of course, naturally they follow from the perception of impermanence. So for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's just a formulaic reason, but this way of defining either the wealth of wisdom or the power of wisdom just speaks about the wisdom that sees into arising and passing away. But probably the implication is that when you see into arising and passing away, then you confirm the reality, the principle of impermanence. Then once you see into impermanence, then you know, again, through other sutras, that what is impermanent is dukkha, unsatisfactory, and what is impermanent and dukkha is non-self. So you just have to sort of put together different suttas to get a fuller picture of how they hang together.
Thank you, Bhante.
Any other question? Okay, then let us look, because since I don't see a question right now, let us look at the verses. Actually, the verses are very nice. The verse on wealth. Okay, so the first verse just enumerates the wealth of faith, virtuous behavior, up to the wealth of wisdom. And then it continues, when one has these seven kinds of wealth, whether a woman or a man, it's good that it's quite inclusive here. Whoops. They say that just a little aside on this, whether a woman or a man, we're still in May, right? Earlier this month, I gave the keynote address at the UN International Vesak ceremony in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And I noticed during the first part of the proceedings, like almost all the distinguished speakers were males. Maybe there were one or two women, but probably 10 male speakers. So I said, we're living in the 21st century. It seems when Buddhists organize events, the formal Buddhist organizations, they always give like the special speaking positions to the men. I said, it's time for us to come into the 21st century and to give like equal speaking spots to the men and women. And that brought a round of applause from the audience. Okay, so anyway, so the text says, whether a woman or a man. So they say that one is not poor. Yeah, that's very important. That one's life is not lived in vain. And so don't be concerned with material wealth. Of course, you have to acquire enough wealth to be able to live comfortably, support your family. But the important kinds of wealth to acquire are those 7 kinds of wealth. And even if you are poor, if you have those 7 kinds of wealth, you can rejoice that you have not lived in vain. And then the last verse says, therefore, an intelligent person, I think this was a Vinyu Purisa, one with spiritual intelligence, remembering the Buddha's teaching, should be intent on faith and virtuous behavior. Confidence or pasada, is a counterpart of faith. The two go together. And vision of the Dhamma. Vision of the Dhamma is the term for wisdom. And so those are the types of wealth that one should acquire. And if you have those kinds of wealth, even if you're poor materially, you can say that you've lived, that you're still a wealthy person. Okay, just momentarily, I saw another hand come up in the question box. Okay, so this is Franz Lee, I think.
Yes, Bhante, so nice to see you.
Okay, good.
I just want to relay that when you talk about moral shame and moral dread just now, I was recently listening to an audio book about near-death experience.
An audio book about what?
Near-death experience.
Near-death experience, yeah.
And there is a chapter about a life review, and like the whole life flash in front of their eyes of what they have done. And even to people who are Puthujjana, who have never heard about Dharma, if they gone through that experience, it would really bring moral dread to them, because now they are ashamed of all the little things that they have done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I've heard this too, that, and this is why it's so important to train the mind and to develop those qualities of hiri and ottappa, that when people go through the near-death experience, of course, this is people who have emerged from it and come back. It's said that the whole life experience sort of flashes by in just a few seconds, and you start to remember like the various misdeeds that one has committed. And this can bring a deep sense of shame, regret, remorse. Whereas if one is engaged in a lot of good, wholesome activities, that can bring reason for rejoicing. But what I would say is that it's natural that all of us, unless we have an extremely innately pure character, we've committed little transgressions. But if we're going through that near-death experience, we shouldn't let the mind and those little transgressions come to mind. We shouldn't let the mind latch onto them and get pulled down by them with deep sense of remorse and fear, but we should bring to mind our good qualities and our good actions and rejoice in them and let that use that rejoicing to overpower the regret that we might feel for our little transgressions.
Bhante, can I add one more observation, and that is the power of mindfulness?
Yeah.
I was listening to a New York Times podcast about falling in love, and people report that the first moment they realize they fall in love is so overpowering. And then later on, when I reflect on it, I think it is the moment of missing your mindfulness. You're no longer mindful, and therefore you fall in love.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, let's take some quick questions. Okay, we'll take Vandana. Vandana.
Thank you, Bhante, again for your teachings. I just want to make a comment what you gave the example for sati, the smriti, the remembering part that you mentioned about when you take a route and put some your post like a tape, right?
Yeah.
That's a really, really good example because in daily life, we are not mindful, like taking one step. We are not mindful that we are walking towards the kitchen or doing something. And those small moments counts when it comes to mindfulness. So thank you so much for giving that example.
Okay. It just occurred to me when I was speaking. Okay. We'll take, let's see, one more question. We'll take, this is Sumana.
Thank you, Bhante, when you said about the generate joy in our last moment of death, is that Chetana or is it Aditana, Bhante? That generate that Dharma that we generate at the last moment of life?
I'm not sure that I would call it aditana. Aditana is a determination. Yeah, I don't know if a term for this. It's just giving rise or rejoicing in the wholesome that one is done.
Is that Chetana, Bhante? Would that be Chetana?
In Abhidhammic terms, you would say that Chaitanya is involved, but it's a complex state. You just can't reduce it to one particular mental factor. But it definitely it involves Chaitanya, volition.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, did you have another question?
Yes, Bhante. I hear it in passing that you mentioned about death for an intelligent person. You mentioned something
I
like
mentioned in passing what?
intelligent person. I think the first sentence on the last paragraph.
That's what the sutta says, yeah.
Yes. And you happened to mention about the Pali word, is it? Vinu Purisa?
I think so. I don't have the Pali right in front of me right now.
Right. Okay. That's
I
all
could have
right.
gotten it. Yeah, I could have gotten it, but I didn't open it.
There's some reasons that I need to know the word. That's all. Yeah. Thank you, Bhante. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Okay, then if there's a quick question, I'll take one last one. This is Undran.
Hi, Bhante. I just wanted to just check. I don't know if I misunderstood. Did you mention that we shouldn't hold on to our latch on to regret about wrongdoings in the past, or did I misunderstand?
No, that was correct. Like sometimes those regrets, remorse comes up. And of course, it's a reminder that one has committed some transgression and one simply recognizes it, but one shouldn't let it oppress one, weigh one down, and lead to sort of negative self-evaluation, but just recognize it. And instead of latching on to the bad actions or transgressions, think about the good one has committed and it or performed, and then rejoice in the good. And use that rejoicing to overpower the sense of remorse through the unwholesome deeds.
I see. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to have to end the session now. So we end by the sharing dedication of the merits. And so I'll recite the verses in Pali for sharing the merits with the devas, the nagas, and the other spirits. I believe the page for the text for sharing the merits is available on the BAUS website. If not, I'll check and put it up there. There we go. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Vanyanta Manumoditva Chirangra Kantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Vanyanta Manumoditva Chirangra Kantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Vanyanta Manumoditva Chirangra Kantu Mang Parang Dukha Pata Chani Dukha Baya Pata Chani Baya Soka Pata Chani Soka Bantu Sabe Pipani No. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to end with 3 bows to the Buddha. And so those in the room can stand.
And a bow to Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Good
Good
to
to
see
see
you
you,
back.
Bhante.
Bhante, good to
Thank you,
see you
Bhante.
back.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Bhante.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
Good to
Thank
have
you,
you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Nice.
Thank you.
Welcome back,
Thank you.
Bhante.
Thank you.
Okay,
Take
thank
care,
you.
happily.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. Welcome
Thank you.
back.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bhante.
Thank you.
Okay, now
Be healthy, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu.
Thank you, Bhante.
we want to stop the recording.